My ex-wife sat across from me, tears streaming down her face as she sobbed uncontrollably. You must have held on to something from the divorce settlement, I ventured, sliding a glass of water in her direction. After all, you got, what, $1 million, plus $300,000 from the sale of the company and the house. We, invested it all in stocks, hoping for a good return, she stammered between sniffles. And we lost most of it in the recession. Sandy gulped down half the glass and wiped her nose, her voice breaking as she added, Jed's been unemployed for 6 months, and we've been draining our savings. Her tears started anew, flowing like a flood. And what exactly do you want me to do? I asked, my tone edged with inevitability. Could you help us out a little? She pleaded, momentarily pausing the waterworks to fix me with those enormous, glistening eyes that once melted my heart. Unfortunately, that's not an option for me, I replied, my voice firm. I live on a tight budget these days. I used to have a thriving business, but I had to sell it when my unfaithful ex-wife demanded half. I spent a fortune buying this apartment and staying near my new job. Sure, I make enough to get by, but I can't save much. Sandy hung her head, either too ashamed or too disappointed to look at me, no doubt realizing there wasn't another profit to squeeze from me. I do allow myself one small indulgence, though, I added casually, gauging her reaction. Her head snapped up, a flicker of hope igniting in her eyes. I have a neighbor here in my building, I began. She's a widow, and for $200 a visit, she provides me with intimate companionship. We've worked out an arrangement that works for both of us. Sandy's face was a study in conflicting emotions, shock, confusion, and maybe a flicker of interest. I continued without hesitation. I spend $1,600 a month on this, which gets me 2 visits per week. If you're interested, I could offer you the same arrangement to take her place. Her expression hardened into one of indignation, disbelief etched in every line of her face. I'm sorry if that seems crude, but let's be honest. You can't expect me to give up my one luxury just to help you, I shrugged. She sat in silence, the desperation she tried to mask now clearly written all over her face. Take your time, I offered. Discuss it with Jed and get back to me. 3 days later, she returned. I'm, willing to do it, she mumbled, staring at the floor. 8 times a month for $1,600. Fine, I replied, though I laid out 3 conditions. First, I don't want to do this behind Jed's back. He'll have to stay in the living room whenever you're in my bedroom, so I know he's aware of what's happening. Second, I continued, raising another finger, I always use protection. And third, like my neighbor, you'll provide full service 4 times a month. Sandy looked at me with resignation, her face twisting slightly. I guess we'll have to agree, she muttered, her voice barely audible. Great, I said, clapping my hands. Tomorrow, bring Jed to my apartment. I'll let you in, fix him a drink, and then you'll come to the bedroom. But I expect you to hand your clothes to Jed and follow me in completely naked. The next day, when I opened the door, there they stood. Both looked nervous, but Jed managed to meet my gaze before stepping into the living room with Sandy. I gestured toward the chair. Want a drink, Jed? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. I've got whiskey. I believe that's your favorite. Jed nodded, though he looked away, seemingly uncomfortable. Smirking to myself, I poured him the cheapest whiskey I could find. A bottle so low-end that even the local hobos might have turned up their noses at it. I hope this helps ease what's coming, I thought as I handed him the glass and turned to Sandy. All right, you know the way to the bedroom, I told her, heading in first. A moment later, she entered, entirely nude as instructed, and reached to close the door. I warned, wagging my finger. Leave it open. If I do anything you don't want, you can call Jed for help. Sandy obeyed, walking to the bed with hesitant steps. My apartment wasn't large, and I was sure every whispered word would carry to the living room. Turn around, I instructed. It's been a while since I've seen you like this. She complied, her back to me and her front facing Jed. Even at 36, her figure hadn't lost its charm, especially her firm, toned backside. I had prepared well, taking a little blue pill beforehand, ensuring my performance would be nothing short of impressive. For the next 2 hours, I made good on my end of the arrangement. As the hours passed after Sandy and Jed had left, I sat quietly in my apartment, reflecting on the strange nature of the situation I had found myself in. Everything about it was surreal, almost too bizarre to fully grasp. I had always known that my life had taken unexpected turns since the divorce. But this felt like a culmination of years of pent-up frustration, a strange mix of revenge and necessity that had driven me to this point. I poured myself another glass of whiskey, taking slow sips as I thought about what had just happened. The entire encounter had been a delicate balance of power, one that I had longed for during those years when Sandy had used me as a pawn in her own selfish games. She had always held the cards back then. But now, the tables had completely turned. The humiliation, the betrayal, the months of uncertainty and bitterness. Every single bit of that had led me to this moment. I had spent years trying to rebuild, to regain what was lost, and now, here I was, dictating the terms of my relationship with my ex-wife in a way that was both practical and personal. The odd part was, I didn't feel sorry for her, not one bit. Sandy and Jed had taken from me once, but now I held all the power. And as uncomfortable as the situation was, I could feel a strange sense of satisfaction settle deep inside. Maybe it was wrong. Maybe it was dark. But I had earned this. The phone rang, breaking me from my thoughts. I glanced at the screen, seeing that it was Sandy. I had expected this call sooner or later, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to pick up. I thought about ignoring it, but curiosity got the best of me, and I answered. "Hello," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "It's me." Sandy's voice crackled over the line, and there was a noticeable tremor to it. I wanted to make sure everything's okay. Did I do everything right?" "Everything went fine," I replied coolly. "Just as planned." "I assume you discussed the terms with Jed." There was a long pause before she answered, and I could almost hear her struggle with the words. "Yeah, I did. But this feels so strange, you know? I don't know how to explain it, but I feel like we're crossing a line here." I sighed, leaning back in my chair, the phone pressed to my ear. "Sandy, you came to me. Remember? You needed something. I'm not the one who suggested this. I'm just giving you what you asked for." "I know," she murmured, her voice low, "but I never thought it would be like this, so clinical, so businesslike. It feels like we're doing something we can't undo." I felt a flicker of something. Maybe pity, maybe something else, but I quickly pushed it down. "You wanted money, Sandy. You needed help. We're just making an arrangement, simple as that. Don't overthink it. Just stick to the plan." There was another pause, and then Sandy responded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll be back on Thursday, same time." "Good," I said. "We'll continue as agreed. Don't worry about anything else." After hanging up, I set the phone down, feeling strangely detached from the conversation. It was clear Sandy was wrestling with emotions she hadn't fully anticipated, and part of me almost regretted dragging her back into this. Almost. But I knew deep down that she had her own reasons for agreeing to everything. She wasn't forced into it. She had made her choice. The days leading up to Thursday passed quickly, each one a blur of work, quiet moments in my apartment, and preparations for the next encounter. I found myself oddly anticipating the return of my ex-wife, although not for the reasons one might expect. This wasn't about any lingering feelings. This was about power, about taking back control of my life, even if it was in an unconventional, uncomfortable way. Thursday came, and as the evening approached, I began to prepare. I cleaned the apartment, made sure everything was in order, and even set up a fresh bottle of whiskey for Jed. This time, I decided I'd play it a little differently, maybe push a few boundaries just to see how far they were both willing to go. When the doorbell rang, I opened it to find Sandy and Jed standing there, just as nervous as the first time. They had no idea what to expect, but I could see that the tension between them had only grown. They knew what was coming, but neither of them was truly ready for it. "Come on in," I greeted them, stepping aside. "Make yourselves comfortable. You know the drill." Sandy hesitated for a moment before stepping through the door, with Jed trailing behind her, a grim expression on his face. I could see the confusion and discomfort in his eyes, but he didn't say a word. Instead, he sat down in the living room, just like last time, as if the arrangement had already become routine for him. I turned to Sandy, watching her closely as I asked, "You ready for your part of the deal?" She nodded stiffly, her eyes avoiding mine. "Yes, good. Let's get this over with, then," I said with a cold finality in my voice. "You know what to do." Sandy stripped off her clothes without protest this time, though there was a nervous energy about her. She followed me into the bedroom, leaving Jed in the living room, no doubt stewing in his own emotions. As I closed the door behind us, I glanced at Sandy. Her face was pale, and I could tell she was trying to hide her discomfort. But now there was something else, something I hadn't noticed before. A sense of resignation, a recognition that she was playing a role she could no longer back out of. "Lie down," I instructed her. She obeyed without a word, and I moved to the bed, sitting beside her. I wanted to remind myself that this wasn't just some cheap, casual encounter. There was far more at play here. This was about taking back what was mine, about showing both her and Jed that I wasn't some victim anymore. I leaned in, brushing my lips against her ear as I whispered, "I hope you're ready for what's coming, Sandy. This is just the beginning. We're going to keep this arrangement in place, and you're going to keep your end of the bargain. No excuses." She nodded faintly, her eyes closed, no longer fighting. For all the turmoil that had led us here, it was clear that Sandy had already resigned herself to this new reality. And I had too. For the next few hours, we went through the motions. It was cold, mechanical, but it was necessary. When it was over, I didn't feel the satisfaction I'd expected. Instead, there was only a sense of inevitability. Life had come full circle, and I had made sure to take what I was owed. In the end, that was all that mattered. As Sandy dressed and left the apartment once again, I watched her walk out, her head down, her face unreadable. Jed followed her without a word, their silence saying everything I needed to know. They would be back next time, and the time after that. This was the arrangement we had made, and neither of us could undo it now. But I was the one in control. I had taken back the power, and no one, least of all Sandy, was going to take it from me again. I poured myself another glass of whiskey, letting the warmth of the liquid spread through me. Life had a funny way of working itself out after all.